Hey, thanks for coming back. I wanted to present a little bit of a topic, sort of a teaser of what some of the things we're going to cover in Music Theory Class 2 in January. This is a topic that confuses a lot of people, and if you can grab a hold of this now, this might answer several questions that you may have had in making music over the years. If this stuff doesn't make sense, don't worry. Take the class. The foundational stuff will come about a little bit later. So the topic is 4- and 5-note chords and how we use their symbols. We talked about when using major scales that you've got a few rules, like you have to use every letter once, you can't duplicate letters, and so forth. When we notate chord symbols, a 4- or 5-note chord, there's a few rules, and sometimes folks who don't know the rules get them wrong and cause a lot of confusion. So let me clear up a couple things. We use a system of chords based on thirds. So up until now, we've been doing triads, 3-note chords, looking at 1, 3, and 5. If you're analyzing a 4-note chord, you start off looking at 7. So you're going to have various types of 7th chords. Okay? Now, the symbols that we use to denote the 7th chords are shortcuts that imply more information than is right there. Okay? Now, as we learned in our prior modules, in most chords, the 5th relationship stays the same. So if the 5th relationship is moving around, it'll have its own separate notation. Sharp the 5 or flat the 5, or maybe diminished or augmented might be involved. But that's outside of the scope of what I'm talking about right now. But in general, for everything we're saying today, the 5th stays in its place. So we've got a couple of variations to look at. First off, this guy with everything major, just like it looks, 1, 3, 5, and 7, just like the major scale. Okay? Another variation is if we flat the 7. Okay? Yet another variation is if we flat both the 3rd and the 7. And I'll give everybody 3 guesses, and the first you don't count about the one that's left. It's actually a flatted 3rd, but a regular 7. So these 4 variations, I want to give you what the symbols are and why the shortcuts are the way they are. So if you've been following along at home, hopefully you wrote down those 4 formulas, and I'm going to unpack them for a minute and impart a couple of rules that also come to play when you do 5-note chords or 9ths, 6-note chords or 11ths. The rules still technically apply even though people get them wrong all the time. So let's look at this for a second. If you have a C, we're going to do everything in C to make it easier for me and everybody. C major scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, and B. Now we're going to do the first 4-note chord is going to be the formula that has nothing flatted at all. 1, 3, 5, and 7. This is C, E, G, and B. And in the system of classical theory, you always have to describe the relationship with the 3rd first, and then the 7th or 9th or other things after that, assuming that the 5th is in place. This is from the beginning days of the original classical music theory of analyzing harmony. So you would have to describe this chord in its 3rd relationship first, in this case major, and its 7th relationship then next, because the 5th is assumed to be in place unless otherwise stated. So to say this in classical music theory, you would call this a C major, major 7th. That's a little bit pain to say all that. You start stumbling around. So we've created a shortcut symbol that we all use today in music that's called the major 7 chord. So if somebody says a C major 7 chord, it's these notes right there. It's this formula. We just say major 7, but it's implying a major 3rd as well. Okay? So we move on. There's only 4 of these, so stay with me. We're not going to be on this too long. You can go back to playing Angry Birds in just a second. If we flat the 7th, which is sometimes called the dominant 7th, as someone ably pointed out today, those notes are going to be C, E, G, and B flat. According to the original classical musical thing, we'd call this C major minor 7. But that's a little bit of a pain to use because you get all stumbling over all the stuff. So we have a shortcut that we just call it a 7 chord. So if you see the symbol that says C7, C7 is a shortcut that implies two pieces of very key information, a major third and a minor seventh. Lots of folks get this wrong. This is what it's supposed to be. Okay? Somebody has a 7 chord, needs a major third and a flatted 7 from the diatonic scale. Moving on to the other two flavors. If we decide to flat both the third and the 7th, according to that classical thing we talked about, we call this a C minor, because we talked about the third relationship first, minor 7th. If I said, hey, play a C minor minor 7th, everybody's going to look at me like, what in the world is that? Because it doesn't really mean anything in the way we do music nowadays. So we have a shortcut. Whoops. We have a shortcut rule that says if I describe the chord as C minor 7, there's two pieces of information that this implies. A minor third and a minor 7th. Does that make sense? Lots of folks get this wrong. I'll give you 3 guesses. The first 2 don't count. What's the formula we've left out? Anybody? A flat third, but a major 7th. Now this is going to be an E flat, but a B natural. Now here's what's fun. Of these 4 varieties, this last one is by far the least used. It's not like a fourth of the time it's each of them. It's like by far a third of the, no, that's not even the best way of putting it. 10% of the time, maybe this chord gets used, and I'm going to use it in a musical context here in a second. So it doesn't have a shortcut. And because it doesn't have a shortcut, then we go back to how we would describe it in the classical theory. We would call this, the third relationship, a C minor, parentheses, major 7. No shortcut for this one. It's very rarely used. Here they are in context. I'll go over to the keyboard for a second. There's a C. There's a C major 7. Kind of jazzy, kind of sweet, like honey on a hot day. Those are all major 7 chords. Those are major 7 chords, and I say those are major 7 chords because it's a shortcut by saying those are chords that have a major third and a major 7. Now, a 7 chord, in some circles called a dominant 7th chord, just a C7, C, E, G, and a flatted 7. So we've got a B flat. Now this can be used musically in several different ways. In diatonic music, the 7th chord, which has a tritone right in the middle of it, which causes all of the dissonance and tension that make it want to resolve to the chord that's a fourth above the one that we have now. So the C7 chord would want to resolve to the F above it. This tension wants to get released inward or outward, but that's actually in theory class 3, so don't let that throw you. C7 wants to be resolved if you're in diatonic music. But if you're playing the blues, the C7 doesn't feel like it has to resolve, right? Because you go, everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die. Everybody wants to go to heaven, yeah, yeah, but nobody wants to die. There's the C7. Everybody wants to tell the truth, but everybody telling all those lies. Now watch. As soon as I hit that 7 chord, it doesn't feel like it needs to resolve because the context I put it in the blues context, doesn't need the resolution. Okay? The third form is the C minor 7, or excuse me, just the minor 7 chord, which is a shortcut for 2 key pieces of information, a flatted third and a flatted 7. In C, that would be a C minor 7, C, E flat, G, and B flat. Isn't that a song? That's like from the 70s. Come on, y'all, you old people should know that song. I don't know what it is. Okay. No, I'm not looking at Bobby. Okay? So this could be like, the first thing I can think of is joy, and that's the wrong key, and pain, it's the horrible musical example, but let's not edit it, it's okay, I don't care. But it's a form of the minor, has a little bit more love to it, use it every day, all kinds of ways. Now, the one that doesn't get used as often, the minor major 7 chord, C minor major 7 chord, is wonderful to use in jazz settings or even in normal music settings when you've been doing a minor key for a long time and maybe that final chord. So I'm going to play a song for a little bit in C minor, and then at the very end, I'm going to put a C minor major 7 chord, and you go like, oh, I've heard that. So if I go, yeah, da, 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 you do, da, da, yeah, yeah, do, you, do, do, yeah, da, 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 do, do, da, 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 do. Okay, so that final chord, C minor, major 7, all by itself, it's kind of funky, but it's a great, nice way to end and kind of put a little ending thing on. It's also used in all other kinds of music. That's just the first example I thought of. Now, in sum, this rule that says that the symbol shortcut implies several pieces of information under it carries over into 9 chords, 11 chords, and 13 chords. So if you see someone that has written a 9 chord, if they say C9, this same rule applies. This is the one that throws everybody. C9 by itself means a major third, a flatted 7th, which is what everybody gets wrong, and a 9 right where it is, 9 being D in the key of C. So a C9 is the letters C, E, G, B flat, and D. A C major 9 would adhere to this symbol, this chord shortcut. A C major 9 is C, E, G, B, and D. A C major 9 implies that there's a 7 in there that's major. If you don't want the 7, then it's a C add 9, like we talked about when we were messing with the sus2s. Okay? Now, if you don't want the 7, then it's a C add 9. C, E, G plus a D would be a C add 9. C, E, G, B, and D is a C major 9. A lot of folks get it wrong. And add 2 technically counts as well with an add 9. Bobby says add 2 would normally be without the E in it, and yet I would call that a sus2 because I don't have the 3, I've added as 2, and that makes it symmetrical to the sus4. There's an analogy to the sus4.
The C9 does imply the 7 is there.
She says the C9, which if it just says C9, it does imply that the 7 is there, but it also implies that the B flat is there for C9, a B natural for C major 9. Okay? And the same token applies here. C minor 9, the 9 is still D in all of these. It's not been D flat, it's not been D sharp. In all of these examples so far, the 9 is the D. If you say C minor 9, you're implying a minor third, a minor 7th, and a 9. If you need the 9 to be something else, you say it. Flat 9, sharp 9, and so forth. Okay, if that didn't make any sense to you at all, don't worry about it, because it's covered in like theory class 2 and some cases 3. But the rule of the shortcut symbols throws a lot of people off, and the worship folks were the worst about it. So let's start playing by the rules, and I hope this maybe have helped you a little bit to unpack that. We'll do a lot more of the undergirding of this information in this first few modules of theory class 2.